Hi there. My name is David Major. I'm the chair of the photography program at the New York Film Academy, and I'm here to introduce John Henry, who will be your main speaker today. Just want to give you a little snippet about John. John studied a little bit at Queens College. He studied with us. He's an alumni of the New York Film Academy, and he's been working with us at NYFA for the last 6 or so years. And he's been in the process of creating work the entire time. His work is thoughtful, it's intelligent, there's always something deep behind it, and he's really great at sort of looking at the world that he and we all live in. Something else that's pretty cool about John is that he's not only a really talented artist, he's a pretty amazing human. And talking with him yesterday, one of the things we were talking about is his potentially starting a master's program, and the reason he really wants to do that is so that he can turn it around and give back to the African American community and to be a good, strong male role model for kids. And that's kind of a long-term goal for him, which I have just incredible respect for. So without further ado, I'd like to bring him up to talk about his project Stranger Fruit and the process within which it started, and he's sort of exploded in New York and around the country. So please welcome John Henry.
First off, I want to say thank you to Dave Major and New York Film Academy for this opportunity. Without them, the project still would have happened, but it really took a lot of courage for them to really support me, and that is definitely not overlooked. So as Dave mentioned, we're going to be speaking about my project Stranger Fruit. Conveniently, it is literally right around this corner. You can see the work hanging up. I'll talk about the project, how it came to be, and what it's about, and I guess my thought process working through it. A couple ideas that I'm always thinking about, underlying themes for the work, is a simple idea executed well. Work doesn't have to be overly complicated to be powerful. And another idea is this of research and reference, knowing what is out there. Nobody works in a vacuum. So this is where the project began. This is the first image that was made, and this was in 2014. And at the time, I was unsure of what to create, but the need to create existed. 2014, when it began, but the idea really began in 2008. I had just come back from visiting my sister in Austria, and the following day was the verdict of the Sean Bell trial. Sean Bell was the young man who was killed on his the night before his wedding at his bachelor party in Queens, New York. And, me being from Queens, I felt a strong connection to Sean and this whole case. Later that year, 2008, one of my very good friends was getting married, and I was one of the groomsmen. And at the bachelor party, that's all I could think of, was what if this was happening to him? What if this was happening to us? So the images of that fateful night in Jamaica, Queens, they always stuck with me. So for the first image for the project, I wanted something that was, formal, but also my own. And, for a long time I stayed with this image. I didn't know if it was a project, if it was a one-off thing, if this was something worth pursuing, if this was something I would pursue. So what I started to do is I started to do research. I started to look at what else was out there. So I came upon the Pietà, Michelangelo's piece on the left from 1498, and looking at different versions of that. Titian on the right from 1575. The work in itself is in response to the murders of African American men due to police violence. And one thing that stood out for me was the connection of the mother and son and that relationship, because I felt that relationship gets lost in, when these things happen. I mean, just look, what was it, almost a month ago, Stephon Clark in Sacramento, murdered in his backyard. You hear a little bit about the grandmother who was there, but then after that, you don't hear anything of the family, So my thoughts are always with the mother in these situations. So again, I'm going through research. I'm looking at what has come before and how it can inform the work moving forward. So I'm looking at different versions of the Pietà, different artists taking their own spin on it. These two pieces by Andres Serrano, two vastly different interpretations of the Pietà. And some are more serious, some are more casual or more playful. But, different artists putting their own spin on the work. And that was really important for me in the learning process. But the major breakthrough in the project was rediscovering the work of Renee Cox, and on the right, the work of David Driscoll. On the left, Renee Cox, the artist in the image. This piece is titled Ain't Your Mama's Pietà, and that's from 1996. And that really was a breakthrough because of the idea of the black body in art. And not only that body, but being presented by black artists. Ideas of, masculinity, identity, vulnerability, and again, hitting home with that mother-son connection. On the right, the piece by David Driscoll is titled Behold Thy Son, and that is from 1956. And 1956, he was inspired, I don't know if inspired is the right word, but the reason why David Driscoll painted this was because a year earlier was the brutal murder of Emmett Till, the young boy who was killed in Mississippi, whose death essentially sparked the civil rights movement in the United States. That, seeing the image of Emmett Till in the magazine so affected him that he had to do this representation the year later. So there were parallels between David Driscoll's work and my own feelings of Sean Bell. So I knew that this was something, this was a project, there's investigation required. And there are a lot of things I'm thinking about as I'm doing the project. I'm thinking of, again, that vulnerability. So all the men in the images are shirtless and barefoot. Just touching on that topic of vulnerability, and they're exposed, and, one of the ideas from the statement is protection. How can these mothers protect their children? One of the other things that's really important in the work is this idea of gaze. The mother looking into the camera, looking into the viewer, and almost an appeal to the viewer and what that means. And again, from reference, that comes directly from different versions of the Pietà. This one by William A. Bouguereau from 1876. The eyes of Mary staring into the viewer, something that you can't easily look away from. Due to the device, cell phones, internet, whatever, we're inundated with imagery. So you're thinking of strategies to hold the viewer's attention for more than the 2 seconds that it is that you're flipping through posts. And I felt that was really what stood out, was that engagement of Mary, or the mother in the project, staring into the viewer. This is an issue for millions of Americans. It's something that we have to look at, something that has to be addressed moving forward. Now, following up on research and the black body and representations, I began looking at different artists, new artists, basically. So this is Kehinde Wiley's work from 2011 and 2008. He had a huge retrospective at Brooklyn Museum a few years ago. And one of the things that was really important about his work was just seeing different ways that he had been posing the figure. And that really opened up my work for new possibilities. The work was no longer predictable. It was no longer a strict representation of mother holding the son. It basically opened up a venue for problem solving, where there were issues where I could not have the mother holding the son, or multiple bodies. if you think back to the original from Michelangelo, Mary's scale is so huge in relationship to Jesus, but you don't notice it. You don't even think about it. You're really just looking at the figure. You're looking at the pose. But Jesus is essentially a 33-year-old man, and Mary's scale in relation to him is enormous. So again, looking at different representations, different ways to display the body, but still tell the same story. And again, it all follows the same, the same line of thought, or strong yet vulnerable. But again, we have the one shot, the mother's son, but I'm not, as I'm going through this, I'm not wanting to rest, or there's still parts that are missing to the story, and I don't want it to be predictable. If the work is predictable, or if the viewer can anticipate what the next move is, you've lost them. So I'm looking for different ways to add on to the project, and I came across the work of Frances Kearney, her project, Five People Thinking the Same Thing from 1998. And this really stood out for me because it was basically portraits of people not looking into the camera. But that was really important because it was, you put yourself in their shoes. What's going through their mind? How does the environment guide our read of the image? So I began to photograph the mothers individually, just in space, reflecting on absence, loss, isolation, remembrance, hope. In some of the images, you can see that there is a presence missing. Some of them, not so much. But this is, again, just to think about the mothers who have lost. Think of what that feeling must be like. How is it to go about the rest of your day? How is it to go about the rest of your life without your son? And what have they died for? How do they cope with routine? Again, throughout all the images that I'm creating, I'm always thinking of reference. I'm always thinking of images, this large image bank of images that I've seen before from different artists. And if I can pull from them, I'll use that just to strengthen the work. This is from Carrie Mae Weems' Kitchen Table Series, 1990. Again, thinking about what I said at the beginning of the talk, simple yet complex idea. Doesn't have to be, anything crazy or too elaborate. And this series literally takes place at the kitchen table. That same light is overhead, but the people change. The props on the table change. The interactions change. But the entire series, 30 plus images, all at the table. And again, these things, as I see images, as I'm building the shots, I'm thinking about this. If there's a chance for me to recreate something, then I absolutely will do it. But again, we have the first image, the mother-son image, and we also have the image of the mother in isolation, but still something was missing. Still the project felt incomplete, and truly I debated for a long time over what was missing. And I really didn't know. I thought it might have been additional images, maybe, some type of redemption for the males to reappear in the series. But then while I was shooting in Chicago, I was photographing about 6 families in 2 days. And you know how Facebook sends you those reminders when you've become friends with someone? So basically, one person I had become friends with, I had photographed for the project. It was a year to the day when I was in Chicago, and she wrote this amazing poem. And if you have the little takeaway, it is the first piece on the takeaway. We'll talk about this in a second. And when I read it, it struck me like a bullet. It just stopped me dead in my tracks because the words were so beautiful. And when I saw it, I was like, that's what was missing. It was the words of the mother. It was the words of the participant in the project. That's what was missing from the project. The statement, the artist statement is my own words. The images are my words, but the words from them, is their words. That context really circled through and really is what made the project complete. This was the third act that the project needed. So what I did was I made a survey, just a question and answer, about 6 or 7 questions, and I sent it to each and every mother after we do the shoot. And when they have the photo and they can see the photo, just to get their thoughts on what has transpired and what their thoughts of are what's going on in America right now. And again, the honesty from the answers was so beautiful. And again, this is something that I couldn't have completed, I couldn't have said. And, just looking at the second one, I feel sad that mothers actually have to go through this. My son was able to get up and put back on his clothes, others not so much. They are still mentally frozen in that position, that sadness, that brokenness. I feel guilty to be relieved that it's just a picture, because for others it's reality. I feel scared, I feel next. I feel like Tyler could be the next hashtag. This is not something that people are making up. This is a real problem across the country. And yes, while I'm speaking to the African American community, it speaks to us all as Americans. Everyone has a mother. What is that feeling when a mother can't protect her children? Well, we have a section of Americans who feel this way, and this is why this needs to be addressed. The text is so important that it can't be reduced to a caption, so it lives on the wall as its own piece. Now, we can't talk about the project without talking about process, and speaking of how the images come together. So the entire project is shot on film. It's shot on a 4x5 camera. My 4x5 camera's name is Lucy. That's Lucy. And what does that mean? Well, it means, yes, higher quality and higher resolution, blah, blah, blah. I won't bore you with those specifics, but it's really all about that process, that mode of working. It's a slow pace. And I work pretty quickly with my camera, but still, it is a slow pace. I am making one image at a time. So we travel to these locations and we'll spend, just 20 minutes or so just building the photograph. And it gives, I feel, a deeper connection with myself and the subject. We avoid the digital dilemma where I could take 500 photos, 1,000 photos, and pray that I get one that works. But instead, I look at every detail, corner to corner, looking at focus, looking at expression, and trying to make the best piece that I can. And also, if you see on the image, you'll see the entire frame. And that's just to say that there is no cropping going involved. There's very little manipulation. This is essentially the reality for these people at this moment. And all the images are environmental. So I'm traveling to these locations, photographing these people in their home, near the home, outside the home, or where they work or live. And the environments are really just based off where the people live, but it's important to show that some are urban locations, some are rural, some are, the big city, some are, the back alleys, etc., because these crimes happen in the most random of areas. Another really important element of the project is this idea of performance. And oftentimes we don't think of performance aligned with still images. We usually think of it as video, but essentially this is performance. These mothers have not lost their children, but they understand the reality that this could happen to them, and using that as an appeal to the viewer. And for the last slide, I'd be in trouble if I didn't speak of this piece by my buddy Eli Kintz, titled Fruits of Our Labor from 1994. Eli teaches at FIT in the city, and he wrote a book called I Remember Daddy, which is basically a long-form poem traveling back from Africa, chronicling the trials and tribulations of the black male from them through slavery and into today. And when I first discovered this project, it was at New York Historical Society, and it was a slideshow showing someone was reading the work. You listened on a headset, and these images were coming up, and it was cropped in really tight, and as you looked at it, originally it looks like teardrops, and then as it pulls back out, you notice that, oh, this is a body, and what type of body? This is a body that's been lynched. And that's kind of where the project gets its title from, Strange Fruit, the song by Billie Holiday, but the Nina Simone song always resonated more with me. Strange fruit hanging from trees in the antebellum South. The bodies are no longer being lynched, but they're literally being picked off the streets. And that is stranger fruit. Thank you. Any questions?
You spoke a little bit about the locations that you choose, but I was wondering if that was sort of a collaborative process with some of the people that you photographed, or if you scouted the area on your own, or how that part worked.
I choose the locations as I can find people. So it really depends on wherever they are and their availability. So we've traveled, we've shot in and around the boroughs in New York City, Buffalo, New York, Alabama, Chicago, Florida, and right now working on California, Texas, Nebraska, and other locations. It's really just trying to find people, and then I figure it out as we go along. As far as the specific locations for the shoots, it's shout out to Google Maps, because live view helps a lot with that. It's really just finding areas that make sense in relation to where they are. So whether it be the home, and there are things that I'm thinking about and looking for as I'm looking for locations, but it's really just what makes the most sense for where they are located. So I hope that helps.
In the past and in the present of this type of work where there's a mother and son, one thing I noticed is that although obviously it's a tragic situation in the circumstance that has caused this son to fall, however, I always notice that the mother has a blank facial expression versus when the event has actually happened, the facial expression is totally different. Is there any reason why in the past and in the present and in your work that that facial expression still remains blank?
I chose to shoot it deadpan for the mother to be expressionless, but really so that the viewer could make their determination of how they feel, so they're not being super influenced by the look that the mother is giving. So instead of it being, okay, look sorrowful or look this way against this way, just hold your son and look into the camera. And I think that is a stronger way of sending the message, at least for my work. I can't speak for everyone else, but those were the decisions that I made for it, if that makes sense.